we are back, and the Cinetopia team I think the three of us, we're doc lovers here, and I think this is why we're all on this month. And we love Sheffield Doc Fest, and I think, not sure Amaya or Clara, but this was the first time I was able to go in person. And we've done Sheffield reviews over the last couple of years via their online platform, which is really exciting, and that's still very up and running. When you get a press pass or a industry pass, you get to see like the whole gamut of the film festival. And Sheffield really is a world leading festival, and I had my first time in person and did a lot of industry stuff, which was fantastic, and I learned a lot. Amaya, overall, how did you feel about the festival this year?
Well, I felt a bit overwhelmed because there were lots of films I wanted to see, but I couldn't attend the whole festival. And there's also something with documentaries. I don't know if you feel like that, but in a normal film festival, maybe I can pack 5 films, but with documentaries, I feel I need a bit more of a breathing space between documentaries and thinking time and reflection to really digest them and reflect on them. So yeah, I took it a bit more easy in that respect. But I thought it was a great program, and I think it was a great edition. The festival also celebrated the 30th anniversary this year, so I think that was also it was a great year to celebrate, because we are finally sort of out of the pandemic and we can do things in person, and there was a much more general festive feeling in that way. I also really like the fact that the festival is really exploring the idea of the documentary genre. We had obviously the film program, which was divided into different strands and competition strands, but there was also all of the alternative reality program, which was fascinating as well. Just, I mean, you can speak probably more about that, but the industry program also reflected on very important current issues in the documentary film world. So I thought it was just a spot on in that regards, that it was just very comprehensive, and it felt like it celebrated where we are with documentary, which is just an evolving genre that we can no longer fix in a series of norms and ideas. There were lots of films that were really blurring with regards to fiction and documentary. And I know this is kind of an old story anyway, because most of the creative documentary filmmakers have been already playing with these for many years. But yeah, I just thought it was a great edition. And I hope, my hope always with this is that more films get a distribution in the UK, and we can actually see these films in the cinemas all across the country, because that is the problem with most documentaries, that they can only be seen in these type of events. So yeah.
No, it's great. And I mean, I think you alluded to the fact that, so I mean, first and foremost, the festival has been for a long time, I don't know if 30 years, but for a long time, a really important industry marketplace. So they have this thing called Meat Market, and it's about literally you pitch to get your film in, which is a work in progress of sorts, or an idea, or something like that. And you pitch the idea, and then they help set up meetings with very important people within the industry. There were people, everybody from National Geographic to like Sky Documentary or Sky Arts, or everyone's there. That's very focused, at least on some form of UK documentary programming, or exhibition, et cetera. And so it's really an important, a lot of times people who go to this festival are actually just there for, meetings and for business and stuff like that within the genre. So there's that part, which is very similar to, you would think IDFA or International Documentary, Film Amsterdam, but also or big places like Sundance and, and Berlinale as well, or, a host of other different festivals that have really high-end documentaries programs. but this program is really, really particularly interesting in terms of, you know, how many films are on at once too. So I mean, there's like, I think like 7 to 10 screens going on in the, you know, for a few days. And it was overwhelming for myself because I was trying to go to programs and meetings, but also, you know, to see films as well, because, you know, we're very interested in programming and talking about them. The only other thing I would say is that it's a new team that's you know, running the festival, so it's taking new directions. And as Amaya mentioned, there's a great interest in you know, different kinds of forms. So they brought even a podcast pitch where they're sort of exploring what documentary means now, and I think they're being quite smart about how they approach that. I was able to attend the opening screening with an Edinburgh-based you know, director was made the film TISH, and both Clara and I saw that film. So I thought we would talk briefly about that before we go to the interview that I did with Paul Sng. Clara, yeah, what did you think of TISH?
I really love Tish, and I'm quite surprised that I actually hadn't come across Tish Murtha's photographs before. Or maybe I had, I just wasn't quite aware of who she was and the person behind the lens. Basically, so Tish Murtha is about a photographer who began working in the late 70s and then the 80s, and documented the human effects of poverty and the repercussions on society, particularly her neighborhood where she grew up, working class neighborhood, in the throes of the Thatcherite government and all that entailed for its youth and their unemployment and their prospects. I loved it because it does bring to the fore that we're only just at the beginning of reevaluating history and how we document history and document people of the working classes. One of the people in the documentary said, history is so posh, it's always about wealth. And that is still very much the case. So a lot of Tish's photos are black and white photos of street scenes, mostly young people and children, the people that she was growing up with, because that's the access that she had. And then later on in pubs, the people aging out and spending their twilight years in dingy, smoke-filled working men's clubs and such. Which makes it sound a little bit more boring than it is. The photos are absolutely fantastic. They're so captivating and so dramatic and so poignant. But yeah, it's they bear a similarity to a lot of the Victorian images of slums. But these are so different in the sense that they're full of joy. And you can tell that she is part of the community, and there's so much, they're rambunctious, they have riotous joy, they're humorous, they're adventurous. And it's about, a lot of her photography is about childhood. So it's just it's resting that narrative back again.
Yeah,
and I mean, yeah, it's really interesting.
I'm, you know, I'm no aficionado of, you know, street photography or documentary photography or whatnot, but I love it. And I, you know, I was so impressed. I am so impressed by Tish's work to begin with, but I think this film particularly does a couple things really, really well. You know, it's really respectful to the work. It's showing the work and allowing kind of that to breathe. And I think the editing is incredible in that sense of sort of, you're able to see you know, sometimes a shot that, you know, in stillness right next to some archive footage that was found of the same activity that, you know, Tish is covering. The other thing I think I was quite surprised about was how incredibly sad her story was. And, you know, I didn't really know the biography of Tish Murtha, and the fact that there was such difficulty later on in her life to get, you know, the funding or the things that she, you know, in order for her to continue to do this incredible work. I mean, this is probably some of the best photography I've ever seen, you know, come out of the UK. And I mean, again, I'm not like a expert, but I could just say just how my response is to great work. And yet, to see how sad that, you know, that particular story is in terms of getting not just the recognition, but getting the respect.
Yeah, her experience is fascinating because I think it's the issues she faced are still very much issues today in the art world. So, for example, she was very wary of being used by the middle class and upper classes in institutions who, since it was in vogue to have, poverty porn will always be with us probably, but that was in the 70s, 80s. It was at the beginning of, sort of idolizing the working class. We should get working class artists into these institutions. And so she was wary of being a token, I think, but it does highlight that there is such a tokenistic aspect to including working class artists in institutions and in gallery shows and such. I think she highlights as well the sad fact that if you are radical politically and are directly trying to come for the institution, then you will perhaps always remain an outsider. Because that's what I enjoyed about it, is she was a sort of a radical political figure, and she was very outspoken and very much part of the movements that she documented. She didn't have that the typical detachment from subject that many documentary photographers choose to keep between themselves and subjects. So I think she said, the use of my photography and my approach to it is based on the conviction that the fundamental value of the medium is its capacity to provide direct, accurate, and vital records of the conditions, events, and experiences that shape our lives. And a friend of hers, or I think it was a tutor, said that she was committed to working class struggle, which is continuous and never ending. And I find her a really interesting figure from that point of view, that she was, so out with the institution, but so embedded in unions and working class struggle.
Absolutely. I think it's important also to note the way that this film was being told. It's being told through, her daughter, Ella Murtha, who's a curator of her archive, going back and sort of taking certain people that were important in her life, as well as, like you said, tutors or friends or colleagues to sort of speak about it and sort of reflecting on the life. So I just thought it was really carefully done, and I really, really liked it. And so we will be in the next, when we come back, we will be talking to Paul Sng, who we originally talked to a couple of years ago for his film Polystyrene, I Am a Cliche. But Paul's a Edinburgh-based filmmaker, and we'll be talking to him about the film when we come back. So I'm here in Sheffield, and I'm here with Paul Sng, and had his world premiere of TISH, a new documentary about Tish Murtha. Paul, thanks so much for talking to me today, and congratulations on your amazing world premiere. It was a fantastic night.
Yeah, thank you. It was quite overwhelming because you make these films, and the best way to see them is with an audience, and seeing the love in that room for Tish, for Ella, and the people in the pictures was really wonderful.
I know your films. I love, actually, we met originally on this podcast radio show, and I think you have a really distinct perspective on what you choose. And I just firstly wanted to ask a very simple question, as why did you want to make a film about Tish Murtha specifically?
Seen Tish's work online for the first time, and the first image that really captivated me was the ones of Tish's brother sort of jumping out of the from a scheme on the first floor onto some mattresses, and I remember doing that in my childhood in the 80s in southeast London, and it's just a great photograph. You've got everybody is looking at this boy jumping off the roof, which is actually Tish's brother Glenn, and then you've got one of Tish's other brothers, Mark, who's holding this dummy, and everyone is, including Mark, is looking at Glenn jumping out of the window onto these mattresses, except the dummy, and the dummy is looking at Tish, and I don't know whether that was deliberate or not, but it's just amazing. And the more I saw of her work, the more she became an inspiration. And then not only was she a fantastic photographer, she was also a brilliant writer and political, and Ella and I had, met online and were friends online, and we'd never met in person, and we were chatting about something. I'd edited a photography book and was working on another one, and Ella had recommended a photographer to me, and then I sort of just messaged her and said, have you ever thought about doing a documentary about your mum? And she said, I've been approached, but it's not something I'd want to do. And so I said, well, if you ever change your mind, let's have a chat. And she said, well, let's have a chat anyway. So we had this phone call, and it lasted for about 2 hours, and we just really got on, and I think Ella could see that this kind of film that I was interested in making with her would be very collaborative. So we met up in Newcastle, and I think this was around about after the first lockdown, so a few years back, and we got on well in person. And so we then found our producer, Jen Corcoran, and Jen is from the Northeast, as is Ella, and it was very important to us that in making a film about a working class female photographer from the Northeast, that the team that made it was representative of that. And of course Jen and Ella are, and then we brought in a woman called Holly Galloway as our cinematographer, who's also from the Northeast and working class, and off we went. And so for me it was, I'm interested in stories about people who maybe haven't been recognized enough, whether that's in their lifetime or not. And I'm also interested in stories about people who challenge the status quo, and Tish certainly did that. So I think it was one of those projects that you always I think I've always wanted to sort of make stories about people that maybe not always completely unknown, because Tish certainly wasn't completely unknown, but someone who hadn't really received the due that they deserved. And so that's how we went. We did a Kickstarter to raise our initial budget, and then we got some funding from Screen Scotland and from BFI Doc Society Fund. And then BBC came in and commissioned the film too. So, it's been a journey.
One of the things that really hit me about seeing the film is how, actually Peter Bradshaw said it was a humane tribute. And I just feel like the way that you shared her story was really emotional. And I didn't expect to get so emotional. And I think I did, especially after the Q&A and everything like that. It seems like you had a really good rapport, as you said, with Ella. She mentioned something in the Q&A around you guys having a similar background, and so how did that dynamic in the relationship grow over time?
Well, one of the first things that Ella and I spoke about was, being only children, and, having been from single parent families, our mums raising us, alone, and being the centre of your mum's world. And, that very much, Ella says it in the film, it was me and Tish against the world. And with my mum, it was very much like that. And, Tish made sacrifices for Ella. My mum made sacrifices for me. And I think when you have that in common with someone, you've got an initial thing to form a bond around. So that's just what kicked us off. And then I think, the film, Ella often says, she said the film could have only been made by me, you and Jen, and I think that's right, because the challenges that you have to overcome when you make any film are considerable. And especially making a documentary, the funding for indie feature documentaries in the UK is limited. So I think it's very important that if you have a team, that they are very much, one, committed, but two, trust each other, have one another's backs, and that I consider them both friends. It's been a brilliant film to work on, not only in terms of creatively, but also in terms of nourishing me, as a person and as a filmmaker.
The other thing I just, as I kept watching the film, I'm a huge fan of the film, like Chris Marker and La Jetée. And I think every bit of your film, the way you handled the artwork, from the filmmaking and the editing, I thought was elegant. And I just thought there was just something so beautiful about everything being put together. So your editor was incredible as well. So how did you think first, how did you come with the idea on how to approach sharing someone else's art, which is quite beautiful, as if you just look at it as like in a gallery or something like that?
Yeah, it was a real gift that Tish has, a formidable body of work, despite not, receiving the adulation and acclaim that she deserved in her lifetime. She did take a lot of photographs, a lot of which have never been seen. So we had those, and we set one rule quite early on, which was that Tish framed those pictures, and and the composition, everything that was set in stone. We didn't want to be like zooming in on them or making them 3D or anything like that. We wanted them to be as they were. So we had all that. What we didn't have, there's no archive of Tish really, you know. So we had to think about how do we bring her to life in the film beyond photography. So for those scenes, I had the idea that we could, rather than it be straight ahead reconstruction, I thought about what we called a memory space. So Jen found a sort of disused Marks and Spencer on Darlington High Street that was available for artists if they had sort of some kind of artistic endeavor or enterprise that would be there. So basically we built a set there, and we were very lucky. A guy called Richard Drew, who was you know, a fan of Tish's work and is a production designer. He had designed the set for the Ricky Gervais show Afterlife, and so he had, you know, some materials. And so I think he found the original schematics for what was Ella and Tish's home at one point, and he basically just designed it, and then it was built in this M&S. And I mean, Ella came on set and was, you know, I think she had goosebumps just thinking how eerily it looked. And the other production designer who had Siam Colvine, she created Tish's world from nothing, you know, from furnishing it to making it look like how Tish's house would look, because Tish used to put she used to curate her walls, and so she would put her work and things she was interested in on, you know, on a wall in front of the mantelpiece. And so that then, you know, bringing in Xin-Fei Chen, who sort of plays Tish's presence, gives you that sense of, you know, we're watching her work, we're seeing her and observing her. And then Maxine Peake was a natural choice for narrator because, one, she's brilliant, two, her politics, and, you know, she was already a fan of Tish. And then it, you know, when it came to the edit, you know, we were thinking about how do we actually, you know, like, what is the balance between seeing Ella in conversation with people who knew Tish, seeing the photographs, what else are the other kind of elements of the story? So, you know, seeing contact sheets, seeing negatives. And we had, you know, two really brilliant editors, Lindsay Watson and Angela Slavin. And I think for them as well, I mean, Lindsay, you know, knows a lot about photography, and really, you know, some of the ideas that she came up with about around how we present those photographs are really key. And Ella is, you know, as the custodian of Tish's legacy, knows those images better than anyone. And so at some point, Ella was able to sort of come in and say, no, put this picture there, no, that one there. And really to be guided by that was really useful, because, you know, you might have ideas about where things are going to go, but, you know, Ella is a curator, you know, in terms of Tish's work. Nobody in the world knows it better than Ella. And yeah, it was, I mean, edits are always, you have moments, I think, where well, I do anyway, on every film I've ever worked on, there's a moment where I think, we haven't got this, you know, we've got to reshoot, or we've got to, and I certainly had a wobble on this film. And then, you know, you take your time a bit more and you realise, no, we've got this film, you know, we've found it, we've got it.
Like I said, I was really, really emotional in the screening, and I just didn't know much about Tish's life and what happened. I think a lot of people even responded how angry they were. When did Tish become more known? And do you think in some aspect your film has the impact to bring the story out to more people? And is that one of the things you wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in her lifetime, it wasn't that, you know, she was completely unknown, because, you know, she very early on had exhibitions. And I suppose before she died, she was probably maybe a cult photographer that if you knew about her, you loved her. And it was probably a special group of people that, you know, I always think that, you know, there are, you know, cult films and cult artists and cult musicians that, although, you know, a lot of people might not know about them, the people that do cherish them, you know, and I think that can be sometimes just as important as having mass adulation. But then after Tish died, I mean, Ella has done a brilliant job. She's published 3 photography books of her mum's work and some of her writing in as well. And there was an exhibition at the Photographers Gallery, I think in 2017, that was a massive exhibition at the time, which was sort of retrospective on Tish's career. And I think now, though, with the film, hopefully it will, you know, make Tish's work more widely known. But also, as you were saying about watching it and feeling angry, I think it would be great if the film is a rallying cry, because, you know, the economic conditions and the societal inequality that Tish was, documenting back in the 70s and 80s, it never really went away. I mean, I think it might have maybe diminished a bit, at some moments, maybe in, between 1997 and 2010 perhaps, but then certainly the situation that we're in now, where you've got 4.3 million children living in poverty in the UK, many of them, probably the majority of them in the north of England, it's still there. And these communities that were under the Conservative government, marginalised and underserved, that continued under New Labour. They did a lot of good things, of course, but they didn't fix society. And with those two massive majorities, I still think they could have done a lot more. So in the present day, the things, I suppose Tish's work has a circularity to it that 40 years on, the things that she was writing about and the things she was concerned about in terms of the youth unemployment and the abandonment of young people, it all came to pass. And I don't, she didn't predict Brexit because that wasn't on her mind. But certainly what she was warning against was if a generation of people are ignored, marginalised, and given these kind of opportunities that weren't really good for anything other than just cooking the books on employment statistics, then there would be repercussions. And she warns of these reactionary and barbaric forces in our society and describes it as violence on a grand scale. And I suppose if you want to examine an element of Brexit, certainly it was people in communities in some instances that had felt ignored by politicians, ignored by Westminster for many, many years. And this was a chance to stick two fingers up at the establishment. And of course, people that didn't want the sole reason for Brexit, because there's also a huge middle class vote down in the south of England that's responsible for that. But I think looking at how prescient she was and how prescient the themes of her work still are today, I think it's going to resonate.
What is the life of Tish, the film? Its world premieres here. What are the plans now?
So there's another screening on the 22nd of June at Doc's Island in Belfast at QFT. And that's a great festival. I went there last year for the first time, and it's brilliant. I was really impressed with the films that I saw and the team. And, I love Belfast as well. I've got a couple of good friends over there that I'll, be meeting up with. So I'm excited about that. And then looking to confirm an international premiere, wherever that may be. We've got ideas, but I don't want to sort of say anything in case we don't get them and curse it. But I'd love it to have a festival journey because the last film I directed, Polystyrene I'm a Cliche, had a festival journey, but it was all online, so it didn't really get to go anywhere. And it was all sort of doing Q&As on Zoom and in the middle of lockdown and whatnot. So I'd really like it if it could go around the world and if I could get to see some places that I've not been to and some festivals I've not been to before.
And how about theatrical, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we've signed with Modern Films, who I worked with on Poly, and I think I would, we would be aiming to do a theatrical later this year, perhaps around November. Feels like a good time for it.
I mean, actually, the other question I was going to ask around that is, do you think you said 3 or 4 years to make this? Do you think that to me doesn't actually seem that long to make a film, for a documentary film? And my second question is, what's next for you?
I mean, it was actually, I think, 3 years from first chatting to Ella to the film being pretty much finished in post, which 3 years can seem like a long time. I mean, what takes time is not necessarily making the film, it's getting the funding in. Yeah. I think if we'd have got funding, all in one go up front, it probably would have only taken 18 months or 2 years. But it takes a while to get everything in place for these projects. So, yeah, I mean, and up next, I've been working on a documentary about Irvine Welsh, which is called Am I Irvine Welsh? We would like to sort of put that out next year. It's with LS Films. It's produced by Natasha Dack, who's a brilliant producer I've known for a few years, and who, along with Nikki Parrott, exec'd Polystyrene I'm a Cliche. So, yeah, that's what's next. I mean, a bit of a contrast going from, a working class female photographer in the Northeast to, one of Scotland's greatest, or one of the world's greatest writers. But I think, again, Irvine's somebody that, I mean, he has received his due. He's rightly celebrated. I still think in certain people's minds, if we call them like the literary establishment, why has Irving never won the Booker? You know, Trainspotting, I think, was actually taken off the Booker list, and it's class snobbery. You know, they don't like voices like that. And certainly Irving's someone who's always challenged the status quo. You know, he's not somebody that doesn't speak out, you know. And one of the things I like about Irving is that he punches up, you know, he never punches down, he punches up. And really excited to be making a film with him. You know, we follow him around the world for around a year, and watch him kind of at work and at play. And yeah, it's one of the sort of projects that it's very different, because, you know, TISH is in some ways an archive film. You know, you've got present day stuff of Ella meeting people, but with Irving it was happening as we were going along, and you can't plot those things too much, because you've got to have, you know, some freedom and some fluidity to be able to shift and change. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to finishing that. It's edited by Angela Slavin, who I worked with on TISH, and I think it's going to be a special film.
Final question. We're here at Sheffield Film Festival. You've been here many times. This is my first time in person. And but this is, as you said, and it's the first time you premiered a film here. And how does it feel to premiere at Sheffield? And how do you, I mean, and also how do you see this festival in terms of importance? Because I know you've been working on pitching other projects as well, in terms of UK landscape and documentaries. Yeah,
it's the first time I've had a film here, and to kind of go in and have the opening gala film, it's all downhill from now, isn't it, really? But it's wonderful. I mean, I've always loved this festival. I've been coming here since 2016. It's a friendly festival. I mean, the documentary community is generally very welcoming. And yeah, I mean, outside of the Northeast, if we were going to have a premiere somewhere, Sheffield's really appropriate. You know, I'm really pleased that Raoul, Annabelle, Carmen and the team, you know, selected us, because Sheffield, as far as cities go, places that suffered under deindustrialization, and as far as cities go in terms of being friendly and I feel very working class, it's a great place. So yeah, coming here, and then, you know, was also in Meat Market to pitch a Spy Cops doc that we're doing as well, with a woman called Donna McLean, was great. You know, it's been intense, you know, because we had the premiere, then 2 days of solid meetings in Meat Market, and then there's another screening of TISH here at the festival tomorrow, and there's various other things going on. But it's a brilliant festival. I mean, it's easily my favourite festival in England. It's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time to chat, and I'll see you back in Edinburgh. Brilliant. Thanks, Amanda.
Just say fat. Not curvy or chubby or chunky or fluffy or more to love or a big guy or husky or obese or overweight. Just say fat. The very first piece was called A Request from Your Fat Friend, and like 30,000 people read it in a week. And I was like, whoa, okay. My aim is to provoke people to question ideas that we've held on to for so long. The strongest bonding amongst women happens when people are talking about how much they hate their bodies.
Oh, God.
I had a woman take a melon out of my cart, and she went, "It's got too much sugar for you." It's a melon. The wellness industry is worth $4.5 trillion. This is like big tobacco levels of just lying to people. It's like they're trying to pull some Jedi mind trick. It's not a diet.
At the tender age of 11, I had already attended kids' fat day camps.
It was my responsibility. Her size was my responsibility.
You know, I was always, like my father, worried about losing control.
Having cameras going sort of makes things bubble up.
It is a real paradigm shift to look at someone my size, and rather than thinking, boy, I wish that person would put in some effort, thinking, that person may have put in a great deal of effort.
and that might have been what got them here.
Right, so we're back, and that was just the beginning of a trailer of Your Fat Friend, which is Jeanie Finlay's latest film that had its world premiere at Tribeca and its international premiere at Sheffield Doc Fest this past week. Both Amaya and I were there in person for the premiere, and it got a standing ovation, and it won the audience award. And I personally think that that's very well deserved. I've cried in all these films, to be honest. I think every film I saw. But Amaya, I believe you liked it as well. But tell us about this film.
Yes, so yeah, Your Fat Friend is the story of celebrated blogger and activist Aubrey Gordon, and her journey from being a celebrated blogger to a published author. So we follow her throughout 6 years, I believe. And during that time, we see not only her struggles as an activist, but also the dangers of being an activist, and the relationship with her family. And I think it's a very, I enjoy the film a lot. I think it's a very accessible film, firstly. So that's always good for documentaries in a way, because that means that many people will be able to see it and appreciate it. But that doesn't make the film easily digestible, or something that doesn't have any creative flair or artistic validation. I think that's important to mention, because sometimes when people think about accessible documentaries, they just think of a Netflix film. And I think this film is brilliant because the artist, the filmmaker, Jeanie Finlay, she says that this is her most personal film, that she actually said in the conversation. So we went to the screening with the In Conversation, which was excellent. And she mentioned that this is the film that she made for her sort of 13-year-old daughter, and thinking about the type of film that she would have liked to watch when she was that age. And I think this is very important, because in other films I've seen in the festival, obviously it's about stories that still don't get to be seen that much. And I think in this case, the film really highlights the what's the term, anti-fatness?
Fat phobia. I'm sort of reticent to say like phobic, but like, yeah, anti-fat.
I think Aubrey Gordon mentions a lot anti-fatness as a sort of term. So I think is very brilliant. She obviously really balanced really well, the filmmaker, the sort of anecdotes, or like we could say that, like, Aubrey Gordon's telling us her struggle throughout her life. But what I like the most about the film is how the family, both her parents, come into the story, and I think that really shows the care that the filmmaker put into this story, and how she really managed to bring a space of consent and trust between the subjects of the film and herself as a filmmaker. Doesn't feel intrusive at all. It feels very intimate, very respectful. And the reflections that the family have throughout the documentary on how they brought up Aubrey, and the challenges they also face, and their own traumas. I found that very interesting. And actually during the conversation, Aubrey said, the hardest conversation is the one to have with your family. And I think this really sums up the film, the fact that, she's this amazing activist, that she's done so much for LGBTQ struggle, for against anti-fatness, and she's just an amazing person. But also still, how difficult it is to have these conversations with your family that you love, but you might have had conflict because of all these traumas. So yes, I think that's sort of my what I love most about the film. What did you think, Clara?
I thought it was really just endearing. And I think Aubrey's such a likable, genuine, genial kind of person, and so naturally funny, but in a way that she can take a serious subject and then completely tear it to shreds just by laughing at it, because I mean that is the most sort of acerbic and like concise way to do so, I think, and she really weaponizes that. But she's also strikingly intelligent at the same time. I just think she's super easy to watch and really likable and really intelligent. So it just makes it so much. It's not like I mean, if you're following someone for a documentary for years and years, they have to be a likable person, I think, get the audience inside, and she very much is. It's just, and I find a lot of the takes super interesting, explored so many different concepts, social constructs around fatness and thinness and diet culture and wellness and gender, which all tie in and that we've all really come across. So it is relatable to everyone, I think. So I think she says early on, my aim is to provoke people to question the things they thought were always true. I want them to change the way they treat fat people in their lives, and that starts with recognizing that all of their judgments are based on faulty and cruel ideas. And when she gets into it, that really is very much the case. She also says, when I talk about fat, I'm not talking about feelings or self-esteem or body image issues. I'm talking about the way that individuals and institutions treat people who look like me. And when you get into it, you do really start to unpick how cruel people can be and how twisted diet culture is, and also how completely insane it is. So Aubrey has a collection of vintage American weight loss books, which I think is like one of the funniest parts of it. So she collects these diet books, which are completely unhinged. So there's loads of Christian fanatics talking about how finding Jesus can help you lose weight. Find Jesus, lose weight. And there's like a diet for boys versus a diet for girls. There's America's foremost astrologian tells you how to get healthy through the stars. It's brilliant. And just the lies surrounding diet culture and how endemic they are also to female relationships, mother and daughter and friend, and also just wider society. And also, let's be honest, male created advertising culture to female audiences. And also there's a lot of discussion about diet culture rebranding itself as wellness culture, which is now worth $4.5 trillion. So there is a real political bent, socio-political bent to the film, along with Aubrey's personal experiences, and they tie in. It meshes perfectly, and I think it creates a great film.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually know Aubrey Gordon before this film, but I think what you mentioned, Clara, is exactly it. It's like great documentaries are story and character driven, and we were laughing through this whole film, and we were crying, and we were emotional because this character is so it's captivating. This is a captivating, intelligent woman educating us about something that a lot of people don't know about or wouldn't even think about, that it's actually violence that is being, perpetrated against people. And this is one of the most eye-opening films that there's so much culpability here in terms of, in fact, there was quite, during the Q&A, there was quite questions of who is more to blame, and think that Aubrey is very honest about it's not one side politically, or it's not one, it's not one country or whatever. It's, it's completely ingrained in our culture, and also not to completely, it's not something that anyone, can completely get out of. It was a very personal story. And I think that, going back to what Amaya said, I think that that's the parts that worked really well. And I think that's the parts that work really well in terms of how it showed how important documentaries or films are in telling these stories. Because again, during the film, you notice that if there hadn't been a filmmaker there who was incredibly empathetic to this family and to this character, you wouldn't be getting what came out of the family dynamic. So it was ultimately a story about a very small and loving family. There wasn't, these weren't bad characters, but these obviously parents, have a profound impact on their children growing up. And so I just thought that was really beautiful. And I think it's also something really to be shown about the way the filmmaker, this particular filmmaker with this much respect and talent, could tell this story. This couldn't have been told by that many, was a filmmaker who was not as talented and as good at making or understood or wanted to tell this in this way. And I think it was so well done.
I've even started listening to the Maintenance Phase podcast.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sold.
No, I mean, and also just some really funny moments, you know, like again, like a great, you know, as she's in like the closet of, you know, like her parents to get her podcast done or whatnot. But yeah, really great film. Definitely worth a standing ovation and the audience award. So congratulations to Jeanie Finlay, and hopefully everyone will see this film when they can. So the next film we're talking about is The Castle. So Clara.
So The Castle is directed by Martín Benchimol. Apologies if I'm butchering that, but there we are. This is a really interesting story for me, because I mean, I already love Grey Gardens, and there's been a lot of parallels drawn between this film and Grey Gardens, purely because the film centers around a mother-daughter relationship, which takes place in a decaying rural castle in Argentina. It covers their relationship, their strange relationship, but also a relationship which I think everyone can kind of identify with the parent, which fluctuates between great emotional intensity, intimacy, kindness, and alienation and bickering. I think it's a really interesting film, I would say. It's unlike the vast majority, if not 90% of documentaries that I've ever seen, in the sense that it's extremely cinematic and convincingly so, to the point where you begin to question whether or not it is staged or dramatized, which is a great compliment to the filmmaker, I would say, because he has embedded himself clearly so deeply within the family in the castle, so that there is no fourth wall break whatsoever. There is no chasing of subject to ask questions. There is no sitting down to interview. It is the director and cinematographers slinking around the castle, standing in doorways and capturing melancholic, shadowy shots of the decaying rooms in the castle and the people operating within them, and intimate conversations, in-depth intimate conversations, which you're just astounded that anybody could have captured as an outsider.
Yeah, that actually, Clara thinks, I think that was a really great review of what makes that, what made that film. I really liked it, but I have to be honest. Grey Gardens is one of my favorite films. I've written about it. I'm kind of obsessed with how Grey Gardens gets talked about, or how people make films or parodies about Grey Gardens and stuff like that. So I was immediately drawn to watching this film because it felt like the Argentine version of Grey Gardens, and I also think it did. But I think it's a modern film, and so it's not Grey Gardens. It's a film about another family relationship, and it's about class as well, and it's about the expectations of and the struggles that one would experience in terms of having to take on such a big burden, and to continue to have to keep a home and keep your life together, and also your dreams as a young person as well, because I think the mom wants a young person to stay and just dreams to go to the big city. I thought it was beautiful. I also think it's important to note that it was very, like, there were parts of it that were quite funny.
So funny.
And there were quite parts that were sad, but the way that it was so elegant, I keep using the word elegant, but I think a lot of these films were quite elegant, all of them that I saw. But just from the titles to this, the shots to the there's a little lamb coming up and down, and
it's like a fairy tale.
Yeah,
it's a fairy tale.
And the music had this kind of very, like, in fact, I actually played some music before, and I was like, what does this sound like? And it's very Henry Mancini sort of like old Hollywood sort of feel, which fits with this like castle, but decrepit castle of so this picture of the woman who ultimately gave the castle to the that keeps being like shown with lightning. It's very funny,
It's so funny. It's so funny. I think it is the most masterful use of sound in a documentary I have ever seen. That is, I love documentaries. Documentaries have been my thing since I was a teenager, writing about it for like 8 years, and I think it is the most masterful use of sound. You'll have to just see it to understand what I mean. But yeah, the class dynamics I think are particularly interesting because there isn't much information given, at least what I read in terms of blurb, like preamble to watching the film. So there is a little bit of mystery there about the ownership of the castle, who owns it, how has she come to own it, and then through the selling of the castle, or the attempted selling of the castle, it emerges that there's a strange relationship there, and that this woman was actually a servant working in the household for much of her life. So yeah, the shot keeps returning to this. So there's this tension between the woman who currently owns the castle sort of enjoying the mythology of the family, the glamorous family, and still being sort of owned by them as she continues to live in their shadow and under the portrait of the former lady of the house, which is just looming over everyone constantly in all her glamorous 1960s glory, like the ubiquitous portrait of Chairman Mao.
Yes.
It's brilliant. It just alludes to this bygone era. And it just isn't so interesting that it just straddles this woman, at least straddles that point in history, in Argentinian history, when it was essentially like a feudal system, but with like 1960s haircuts and like Cadillacs in the driveway at the same time.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just one of those things when I see places like that around wherever here, the States, I'm so fascinated by them because every one of these places has a history to be told, and this one just has a real this place has such a history, and we saw its history through the people who live there today. I did see a quick Q&A that was done on Zoom of the actual people in the film, and they seemed just as delightful in the Q&A as they did in the film. But Amaya, your thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't love it as much as you both did, but actually now listening to you both, I'm appreciating it more. But yeah, I think to me, yeah, I felt it was maybe too staged, but I think now I agree with what you said, Clara, that just the filmmaker really gained their trust and actually managed to just get those shots. But to me, when the film starts and we see the character of Justina, who's the daughter, and I don't know, it just felt too fictionalized in a way. But yeah, I think is a very subtle depiction of, as you said, the remaining class struggles in this particular context. And yeah, it also reminded me, I think I mentioned it to you, Amanda, to a Spanish documentary called Lots of Kids, a Monkey and a Castle, and it's also about a woman obsessed with having a castle. I mean, it's very different, but somehow there was a bit of a connection there as well with the animals living in the castle, which that was something that I think everyone enjoyed, particularly in the screening. I was, whenever there was a shot with that little lamb, there was lots of laughing.
Love the lamb.
Yes,
it's a different animal in every shot. I swear to God, you're like, where are they coming from?
Yeah, how many
really Snow White-ish.
It was brilliant. I really thought, yeah, the filmmaker really kudos for that. And also, I think it's very comic, the relationship between the mother and the daughter, when the daughter is like telling this family, yeah, I'm going to the capital to do this. And then the mother totally ignores this wish, but it's kind of, she's not being mean. It's just like they have such a connected bond that she can't just envision her life without her daughter. So yeah, I think it was enjoyable, and as you both said, there's a lot of connections, a lot of textual connections between films. I think there's also some influence of Lucrecia Martel's work, who's a very important Argentinian filmmaker, and she's her films are really focused on on class divide in Argentina and the ruining state of the upper middle classes. So I think there's definitely a lot of echoes and a lot of film text that the filmmaker is interested in, but also he has his own style. So yeah, it was definitely a good film.
Yeah, I might be rooting for it in our programming. We might have to fight it out a bit more later on. No, but the castle, it's it was at Berlinale, it was at Hot Docs, it's at Sheffield, so it's making its rounds around the festival circuit, and I think it's funny and cute and beautiful. So give it a try. So, Amaya, you saw Lonely Oaks, and Clara as well. How's that film?
I loved it, which is hard to do when you watch something which is quite painful and quite difficult to watch. But having sort of digested it, I do value it and respect it, and think it is a really necessary film, and also quite refreshing take on the question of what it means to be an activist and movements, and the philosophy surrounding that. I think it's a really honest discussion of what activism means in terms of the many quandaries and choices with regards to standpoints and sacrifice, which are incumbent in taking on energy giants, the state, the police, and the violence sanctioned by the police and other disruptive tactics. So basically the film centers around a lot of footage that was taken by an activist who was involved in the movement surrounding which forest? Do you know the name of the forest? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yes, the forest is called Hambach Forest.
Hambach, yeah,
and it's in the west of Germany.
Yeah, it's been quite a newsworthy story, hasn't it? Like, I think it was reported on quite a lot just because the activists did a really good job of occupying the forest and making homesteads and putting up a good bit of resistance to the police and the state and the energy companies that were employing the mercenaries and the police. So yeah, it centers around this the sort of amateur journalist who's really embedded in the movement socially and environmental movement socially. And he has a 360 camera, which provides a really interesting new sort of new take and perspective, especially when you see shots of them going through the trees. Yeah, it centers around historiography, but it also centers around the tragic fact of his death, which came about during a police maneuver to remove activists from the forest. So it is a really visceral film in the sense that it doesn't really let you escape the fact of his death. It confronts it head on and tries to make some kind of a sense of it, or at least, but never in a sort of like, oh, he died doing what he loved kind of way. It's like the philosophical considerations of activism, like should we put our lives on the line? Should one have to? Did he put his life on the line? Was it a sacrifice? Was it an accident? Who was culpable? I think it's just a really interesting insight into the value of journalism itself and like putting yourself on the line.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what you said, and I think it's also interesting to mention that the filmmaker, so the film is directed by 3 people. So all of them were friends with Stefan Main, who is the journalist or film student turned activist, whose 360-degree footage we see a lot in the film. So they were all studying film together, actually. And then Stefan went on to do, he wanted to do a film about the occupation in Hambach Forest. And so it was very interesting in the Q&A. I'll just mention this because I attended the Q&A of the film. They were talking, obviously, that it was like he filmed so much, and it was actually the parents that gave that footage to the filmmakers because they wanted to have, it's not just because it's the testimony, but he spent so much time researching and documenting this occupation. So the parents put this footage into the hands of these 3 filmmakers, and then they took a long time to go through all the footage. and then they embedded those interviews. So there's also interviews done with people who occupied the forest as well. But these interviews were done between 2021 and 2022, I believe. So quite a long time after this tragedy happened, which also allows the subjects to have a bit of an emotional distance with this accident. So I think it was really, I really love that the filmmakers actually, they just didn't took this story and took all the credit, but actually it's a really interesting theme in terms of cooperation and cooperative filmmaking. And I thought that was actually really, I mean, I thought the story was brutal. And as you said, Clara, it's not just about the environment or climate crisis. Obviously, those themes are in there as well, but the film is talking about what activism means and how, why do we put so much responsibility onto the activist as well. So I think there was very interesting philosophical, as you said, reflections of the people who occupy the forest and the reflections on their own experience and the challenges as well. I thought they were really honest, and I find that the fact that the filmmakers, the three filmmakers, managed to create that space where all of these activists had the safety to say these things out loud. I thought that was super interesting and brilliant of them. But yeah, I think in terms of what I was saying about cooperative filmmaking and the fact that the activists themselves, they say that in the film. One of them mentions that it's not just about the fact that they are cutting down these trees, that they don't need to cut down. It's about the sort of radical action they are taking, and the government fearing that if more people join, more people will see that as a political option. So they just want to remove that from the root. They just want to remove that, more than the idea of you are occupying a house tree. Like, why would you care about that? So yeah, I really found this documentary very important, and I hope it gets to be seen. I've seen a lot of environmental documentaries, and I think this stands out because it really invites you to reflect a lot about the power of activism and the responsibilities of activists and just the mental health toll on them as well. And
I completely agree. I've seen a lot of environmental documentaries, and I think this is probably one of the most valuable ones, because it deals outright with so many dark but necessary subjects within activism and also within the state apparatus which environmental activists have to grapple with and attempt to battle against. I think battle is the only word, really, considering how much violence is considered in this film. I just think it gives, like a lot of the films in the program at Sheffield this year, I think it speaks on the value of journalism itself, and it's quite meta in that sense. And just the reality of documenting tactics and the details of the dynamics at play in situations that arise in occupations like this and protests like this, and just really bringing home that even in this day and age when a lot of people have phone cameras, optics really matter to the police. They matter to companies. They matter to the government, even if they're being briefed to utilize psychological warfare or order to break up protest and disperse hundreds of people gathering in a public space, and they're allowed to arrest people, damage property, threaten people, whatever. Even though that's sanctioned and that's ordered, they can't be seen to be pushing those boundaries, and they certainly can't be seen to step over the line into beatings, into murder. But they do, is the issue. Like, everyone thinks that because people can film now, the police would never dare, they would never do this, but they do. And I think this film really highlights that's where we are, and it deals with the philosophical quandary of, can you unconscionably protest peacefully in a world of violence and against apparatus that systematically and consistently utilize violence? I find that a really interesting moral quandary to consider, because people on the left is notorious and is lambasted for the fact that, it cannibalizes each other, and, there's a lot of infighting in the left. But I think this film really handles those differences and nuances in opinion really well, and in a really considered and respectful way, and quite an open-ended way. I think it raises a lot of questions. It gives some answers.
Well, that's only 4 films we've done that, and we have lots to chat about all of them. But there are so many more films we all saw, and unfortunately we're running out of time because we have another interview to do.